Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And not to say we told you so, but there was a time not all that long ago where we were running a series of programs regarding the incoming General Assembly and their attempts to do a school choice program. And we said, be very careful because they're going to do something that doesn't really address the problem and then turn around and say, but we did school choice. And that's exactly what happened. Just saying. I say this as we approach National School Choice Week. It is January 26th through February 1st, and despite lack of support from the General Assembly per se, homeschooling still is one of the growing efforts in Virginia, but it's so much more than that. And joining us, president of National School Choice Week, and with a new book out, the School Choice Roadmap, 7 Steps to Finding the Right School for Your Child, which is coming out in conjunction with School Choice Week. Andrew Campanella. Andrew, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on the book. Was this, it seems by its construct, the obvious question, okay, I have school choice, what do I do with it? Even though there are a few places where it's really robust and eye-poppingly successful, but bless you for putting a book together for those parents, should we ever be lucky here in Virginia to have a real school choice program.
Yeah, and Virginia is one of those places where, unfortunately, there are not enough options for families, and many other states have more options that parents can avail themselves of or explore for their kids, and those options range from public, charter, magnet, private, online, and home education.
Well, of course, in Virginia, the public school divisions are the ones that set up the charter schools, which makes you wonder what exactly they mean by charter, but I'm sure the definition is buried in there somewhere. And our voucher program is really a scholarship program that the state has to deem you appropriate to receive, and it's still built on tax advantage funds. But it, of course, kissing your sister can still a kiss. Andrew, what are some of the most common questions a parent has regarding finding a school, when they have the ability to choose a school?
Well, the most important thing for families is to recognize that they are the experts when it comes to their kids' education, and they know their children better than anybody else on this planet. So parents want to find schools where their kids will learn, succeed, and be happy. And I think almost every parent knows that just because a kid next door might succeed in one school does not mean that that school will be a good fit for your child. And that's why school choice and having the ability to decide where your child learns is so important. And so parents, I guess, the biggest question that they want to answer is, what environment is the best fit for my daughter or son? Where do they have the best chance of learning, being safe, being respected, and being happy?
Does your book go in, and it seems like we spend a lot of time trying to do that for things like plumbers and carpenters and washing machine salesmen, and you'll have lists and websites, and some of them are reputable, some of them aren't. But I guess the outcome, having the goal in mind, is the first starting point. Like if I heard from a school that said, we're going to make sure your daughter is magna cum laude in Harvard, well, I know that that's a con, but I guess there are people that would fall prey to that the same way a car says, well, we're going to make you a chick magnet if you own this car, and people wind up buying that car.
Right, and so the important thing here is for parents to remember that just because a school might have a good rating or ranking does not mean that that is predictive of their child's success in that school, or just because a school might say that they're fantastic doesn't necessarily mean it will be a great fit for your child. So you want to ask specific questions when you go to a school and you do a school tour to identify if your family's priorities are going to be met. Because you could have a school that by all definitions, is a, quote, great school, but for whatever reason, it might not meet your child's needs, or the coursework might not be rigorous and relevant for your child. And so I want everybody to look at the process of school choice as something that's very individual, just like we make other choices in our lives, and we choose what we want to eat for breakfast and what we want to do during the day, and bigger choices like what types of cars to drive and where we live and who we marry and things like that. We put a lot of thought into those big decisions, and the decision that somebody else makes for their own life might not be reflective of what you want for your life. Schools are no different.
Mm-hmm. Is there... And I guess that's the harder question. For example, I consider myself to be a wildly successful broadcaster, though if you talk to most civilians, they would look and say, well, he does a radio show in little old Charlottesville, Virginia. How successful is he? So I guess it comes down to your definitions, what your goals are. Do you get into that at all in the book and trying to really, from a consumer's standpoint, define success?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's the key.
Absolutely. And so the first step in this 7-step process of finding the right school for your child is to actually evaluate your own educational experiences, because what you learned in school or didn't learn or wish you learned will have a lot of bearing on how you look at education. And so after that, then it really is talking about what your child's interests are, their needs are, their priorities are, your family's priorities, and developing a priorities worksheet, which will help you navigate the process and help you craft questions that you can ask when you visit schools and you look at schools that are specific to your own child. And what I want parents to do is to harness the power of their intuition and what they know about their kids and make that the driving force as they look at schools, and not external information that they're told, because you should only be choosing for your kids. School choice is not about somebody choosing one school that will work for all kids. It's about tens of millions of families making tens of millions of individual choices for what will work for their individual kids.
Cost is also something to consider in here, especially how few places provide a real good voucher system, where we hear the state is going to spend $10,000 or $11,000 or $12,000 per year on the average public school student. It shouldn't cost that much for an individual parent to do that, or is that a lowball figure?
Actually, when you look at private education, I think that the average private school tuition is lower than that. Mm-hmm. And so what I encourage parents to do is don't automatically write off private schools just because you think immediately that you couldn't afford one, because they might be more affordable than you think. There are also lots of private scholarships available, things like Children's Scholarship Fund, ACE scholarships, other private scholarship organizations that you might be able to tap into if you're eligible for those scholarships. So include private schools in your search with the understanding that there might be opportunities for tuition assistance.
The old axiom, the customer is always right, is something I would always be worried about in a school. If a school says, whatever you want, we'll do, I guess could also be kind of a red flag, couldn't it, Andrew?
Certainly, and that's why I think the first question you should ask when you go into a school tour and you're looking at a school is, tell me what makes you unique, and listen to that answer, because that is the opportunity, sort of an open-ended question for a school to describe what makes them unique and what makes them special. And if the answer to that question just parrots back what you said you're looking for, you got to dig deeper. And the second question that I encourage families to ask is, what are your academic expectations for students? You want to find out if they're setting high expectations. You want to find out how they plan on meeting them. And then you want to find out what they're going to do to help make sure your child is learning or above grade level. So you really have to dig deep and ask questions, and then make sure not only you get answers to them, but you get answers to questions related to your specific priorities too.
Should parents be wary of statistics? I know some of my children went through traditional college. Some went to for-profit. institutions where there's a much more strict regulation on statistical analysis over jobs. But then there are stories of those institutions padding the numbers, not necessarily doing what the student needs just to make sure their statistics look, or report to the Department of Education right. Surprise, a bureaucracy making some things operate not the way they're intended to. So are statistics, as they always should be, something to be looked at with a squinty eye?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's helpful to know what a school's grade is, and that can inform your decision or the rating. However, you need to remember that when a school is graded, in many cases, the grade A, B, C, D, F is not based on the same numerical calculation that a kid's grade would be at a school. So if a child gets a 60 on a test, that's usually an F.
Mm-hmm.
But if a school has 60% or more kids performing at or above grade level, in a lot of states, that would be an A. So
wow.
These data points need to be looked at based on, the measurement criteria. And so if you want to look at them and include them and evaluate them, that's great. What I think, but you do have to be skeptical. But what I think parents should do is look at how students in a school perform year over year and the rate of growth in learning as opposed to just a snapshot of data from 1 year.
What about parents of younger kids? We're talking about you we're in zones where you're talking about high school and that, but I'm talking about K to 12. The early education where so much is made, but very little is known about a child, what their skill levels are. I think it's hypercritical to have school choice for kids at that age because some of them come in differently skilled than others. What about that lower end of the educational spectrum? Andrew, take us into how your book works with that.
Well, really, the book is designed for somebody, whether they're choosing their child's first school or choosing a newer, different school for their child. So if you're choosing your child's first education environment, you don't have as much context about the different environments that your child has thrived in or found difficulties in the past, but you do know a lot about your kids, so you can use that information to evaluate. And a lot of this information will come once you go to the schools and you look at them and you get a feel for that environment. So once you evaluate all the different options you have and visit schools and ask questions and really consider everything there, you'll be able to hopefully find a good fit. And I think it's important that families do search for schools at early ages if they have options, because if you can get your child started in a school that is a good fit, your child has a much better chance of developing a love of learning and progressing from one grade to the other, matriculating so that they continue to advance. And you can really set your child up for a lot more success that way.
Is it also important for parents to understand how to look for a school that sometimes even the public schools in their area can offer the ability to move around from one school to another?
Absolutely. And what I like to tell families is that I would not choose schools based on type alone. So, for example, you'll find great schools that are public schools, great public charter schools, great theme-based magnet schools, great private schools, great online schools, and of course homeschooling, which is an option.
Mm-hmm.
And I say great as defined by what parents would say is great for their kids, not by some general metric. But you can find inspirational, effective schools of all types. And when we talk about school choice, we are talking about all those options. So it's not just finding an alternative to traditional public schools, it's including them in the search process or looking at other traditional public schools that you might be able to access outside of your zone or neighborhood based on open enrollment policies. So really looking at every available or potential option and narrowing the list down based on the evaluation criteria that you've set.
Let me, last one for you, Andrew Campanella. The book is The School Choice Roadmap, 7 Steps to Finding the Right School for Your Child. Homeschooling, we did it for our kids in the middle school ages, and it was surprising how with a little bit of poking around, you find things like textbooks and things like that are available. But what about also co-ops and community groups and being able to find perhaps a coalition of other homeschool moms and dads so that you're also not just sitting in the dining room doing a one-room schoolhouse, but there are other opportunities?
Yeah, and that's really cool that there are more opportunities for homeschooling families now than there ever have been. And people think of homeschooling, if they aren't homeschooling families, and they might think, well, I'm not sure how to approach this. I'm not an educator. I don't know what I would do. But once you get into the swing of it and you get to meet so many other families who do this, work with a cooperative, a collaborative, another group, find online resources, there are so many opportunities for homeschoolers now, which is why homeschooling continues to grow. Every single year, the number of students that are homeschooled rises, and there's about 3% of kids across the country that are educated by their parents. And you don't have to replicate the traditional school day as a homeschooling family. You have a lot of flexibility, you have a lot of freedom, and a lot of opportunities to customize your child's education. So that's why when I was writing the book, I wanted to let families know that this option exists and not to write it off, because it's something that you can consider, especially if you find that you don't have a lot of other options in terms of bricks and mortar schools with fixed locations.
Well, thank you so much for writing the book, and I suggest everyone get a copy of it, send it around, because somewhere in your family is a parent at some point in the decision-making process, or perhaps they think the decisions aren't theirs to be made, and they really should know that there are still there. And, Andrew, maybe we need to have you back on next week to talk about the future of school choice in Virginia, although this year we're just trying to hold on to the Bill of Rights and see if we can't live to fight another day. But I do appreciate everything that you and everyone does at schoolchoiceweek.com. Find out more about it. It starts next week, and the School Choice Roadmap is out there. Amazon, all the normal booksellers, as well as through schoolchoiceweek.com.
That's correct, and schoolchoiceroadmap.com has a link to all those places. And if anybody wants to celebrate School Choice Week, it starts on January 26th, and we can't wait.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. You have a wonderful week, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Maybe we'll see you at CPAC this year.
I will see you soon. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for listening this week. And remember, you can find full versions of all of our interviews in archive form on the podcast channel, which is up at youtube.com. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Find out more about us, our Tuesday morning group coalitions, our efforts to continue to foment conservative principles, even with a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, at tertiumquids.org. Until next week, for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.